Everyone, welcome back to Code to Serve Academy. Today we are going to cover the second chapter, that is class as a basis of all computation, right? So in this chapter we'll be covering up all the topic related to class and object, how to create a class, how we can create an object, all those things we are going to cover in this chapter. Okay, so let's get started. So, what is an object? You already know in the previous chapter and even in class 9, you have learned about the object. So, object can be thought as an identity. What we can think it as an identity having a specific identity. That means each object that you are creating has its own identity, right? And next, specific characteristics and specific behavior. So you already know object has a specific characteristics and specific behavior, right? And in this you can think like object encapsulates state and behavior. What the state is and what the behavior is, we are going to look next. Okay, so let's see. So a object, when we say an object, it has two things. First is the characteristics and second is a behavior. Characteristics is maintained through variables. That means, suppose if I say, is the fan moving? It can be true or false. That means the variable that we create inside a class, that is termed as characteristics. So these you can think as variables. All right, it can be primitive type or it can be our own data type, right? Next one is a behavior. So behavior is implemented using methods. So you might not be knowing what method is. Like you can think of what main method, public static void main. So main is a method. Similar to that, if we create our own method inside that class, that corresponds to behavior. So it is implemented through functions or method. So both are same. Either you call it as a function or you call it as a method. Okay, next let's see class. So you already know what class is. Class is basically a blueprint using which we create an object. All right, so you already know, like in the first chapter of class 9 you have learned, like whenever there is a blueprint and that blueprint we call it as a class, and using that blueprint we create object. Okay, so let's see next topic, like class as an abstraction of sets of objects. Okay, so what we see here represents the abstraction. So if you are asked a question, what class represents, so you can say class represents abstraction. Abstraction of what? Where the characteristics are implemented through data. What I told you, like in a class we declare all this thing, we declare the variables, we declare the methods. So this method is called like what we call it, characteristics. And the behaviors, sorry, the behavior is basically your methods and the characteristics is your data. So this is basically the characteristics and method is basically the behavior, what I already told you in the previous slide. Right here I told you, like behavior is methods and characteristics is the data, that is a data type that we declare. Okay, next. So significance of a class. So if we are told what is the use of a class, why do we create a class? So class is the basic unit, like is a simple unit of object oriented programming, right? So without class you cannot create an object, and without object you cannot compute anything. So class is basically the basic unit of object oriented programming, so which defines the type of shared characteristics, as I already told you, like set of attributes. Attributes is nothing but the characteristics that we declare using data, that is the data type. All right, and the set of behaviors. So set of behaviors are the methods that we create inside the function class. All right. Next. So class, if we see over here, if we see, it is a very important point. Without class, there can be no object. What I told you, without class, we cannot create an object. And without object, we cannot perform any computation. All right. And that take place in Java. That is why class form the basis of all computation in Java, right? That is why the name of the chapter is. So without class, you cannot create an object. And without object, you cannot perform any computation. Got it? Now, next. Like object in Java. So you already know the definition of object. We have covered it multiple of times. We have seen like object, basically what it is doing. It is hiding most of the things that is not required for the user. Okay. And it is only giving you what is required for you. Like it gives a concept of hiding, data hiding. Got it? Now it represents the external behavior of the object. So you have to know, like it represents the external behavior of the object. That is, it doesn't tell you what the inner implementation is. Okay, so you only know using this object, we can get the length, or we can get the breadth, or we can compute any, or we can call any function, and in that function, we'll compute anything. So you know only the external behavior and you don't know the internal logic, right? So it gives a concept of data hiding. All right. Next. So rules to declare a class. So you know like how we declare a class. So you have to keep in mind, like first you need to give the access specifier or modifier. So you'll know what access specifier and modifier is. It's like the visibility, means which class can access the properties or the behaviors of one class. Okay, so we give the access specifier like a public, private, protected, default. These are the four different access specifiers supported in Java, right? So we are going to cover about the access specifier in the later section of this chapter. Okay, so you have to keep in mind, first you need to write the access specifier. By default, like how you write a class, you write a class like public, then class keyword, then hello. You write like this. Okay, so this is the syntax. Okay, so basically what you are writing, this one is access specifier. This is what access specifier, then the class keyword, and then the name of the class, and here we write the body of class. Got it? So this is, here we write the body of the class. So you have to keep in mind these things. Like if you don't write here public, that is also correct. But that means you are writing a default one. We'll cover about this, what public means, what private means, what protected means. But for now, you can think of access specifier. If you don't declare, by default, it is a default property, default access specifier. All right. Now let's see next. So here defining a class. So I already told you I gave you an example similar to that. If you see over here, public class city, one class is created with the name city, and what the access specifier is public. That is a visibility. It gives the visibility to external classes. Okay. Next, if we see over here, these two are basically what they are. They are the data members. That is a member of this class. So they are called the data members. So in the logically, what we call the data member, we call this as a characteristics. We call this as a characteristics, and these are data member. Okay, and here if you see this method, this is basically a method. This part is a method, and method, I already told you, it corresponds to behavior. All right. So here also, if you see, when we declare the data member, like how we declare, we again give the access specifier, then we give the data type, and then we write the name. Similarly, here if you see in the method, In the method, first we write the access specifier, then the return type, and then the name of the function, and then opening and closing circular braces. All right. So we'll cover about this, how to declare a method and what all thing contains in a class. So let's see next. So class body, what I told you, in the body of the class, here if you see in the body of the class, here inside the body of the class, either we can have the data members or we can have the methods. All right. So here if you see, so we have the variables, that the data members is what? The variables. So either we can have a variable or we can have a method. So you will learn about, I will show you, like basically there is, if I move over here, so data members, what I was telling you, data members can be of two type, that is a class variable and another one is a instance variable. So if you see over here I have written two things, instance variable and instance variable declaration is there, and one class variable is there. Only here it is written instance variable. Here it can also be class variable. So what I mean by instance variable and class variable, if you look over here, a class can contain two things. One is the member variable, that is the data type, all the data type that we declare in the class, and the second one is the method. So I told you in a class there can be two things, either the data members or the methods. All right. So here what I am telling, like member variable can be of two type. So it is of two type. First one is a class variable and second one is a instance variable. So I have already told you in the previous chapter, that is the chapter 1, that is a class variable we implemented using the static keyword. Static keyword. I already told you like what static keyword do. Okay. So take an example. Suppose one class is there, class student. So I will write here class student. All right. So here suppose there is int role. So one data type is there, that is a role, and second one is static int suppose class, and we declare it as 7 suppose. So you think of this, we have created one class. In that class it has two types of data members, both are the data member, but this data member is instance variable. What this is called? Instance variable. This corresponds to instance variable, and using the static, it corresponds to the class variable. What I mean by this, suppose whenever you create an object, suppose you create an object in some other class, suppose alpha is the name of the class, and in this class if you create a object, so if we write the main method inside this, public static void main, so inside the main method if we go and declare one object, if we create object of this, so we'll learn how to create an object. But you think of, like we create one object, I will show you example how to create later on again. So you just see, follow this, student s1 is equals to new student. I will again explain how to create an object. So suppose this one is the first object, and similarly we create another object. Similar to the first statement, we create another object. Similar to this, we create another object. So there are basically three objects. So we created three objects from this class student. So now you think of like S1, this S2, and S3. So each class, each object that you created here, it will have its own copy of role. So this will have a separate copy of role. This will have a separate copy of role, and this will also have a separate copy of role. That means you created three times object, first time, second time, and the third time. So suppose you created three objects, so S1, S2, and S3. So all three objects will have a separate copy of int variable created. So this is a separate copy, this is a separate copy, and this is a separate copy. That means you created three times three different objects. That means in all the three objects there is a separate copy of role. Got it? But whenever you write static, that means it belongs to a class variable. That means it will only get created once. It will only get created once. That is a class. You created a class. So here the class cannot be there. So you think it is a uh, you can think of standard, which standard you are studying. Okay, so you think of why we cannot create, because already class is a keyword and we cannot create another variable with the keyword. Okay, so suppose here is standard std, so standard value is 7. You created three different object, but this std variable will be created only once. Even though you create 10 objects, this will still be created only once. That means this value will be shared to this object, this value will be shared to this object. All right, that means the class variable is only created once, and the instance variable is created for all the objects. Suppose you create 10 objects, so 10 times that variable will be created, and for a class variable only one time it will be created, and its value will be shared across all the objects. So you have to keep this in mind, like class variable and instance variable. Class variable is basically created once, and instance variable is created for all the object. Got it? Now next, so you can see over here the same thing that I explained to you. One class is created, and these two are instance variable. That means every time you create an object of this, these two will be created again and again and again. But static will be created only once. That is why the name is given class variable. That means only once that is created. Got it? Now, next. So implementing a method. So you know now like how you can create members, data members. So data member is of two type. We already covered like how we can create. Now we know like in a class we can create two things. One is the data member and the second one is the method. So now we are going to learn what is a syntax to create a method. So if you look over here, first again we write the access specifier like public, private, protected, and default. So these are the four access specifier that we are going to cover again in the later section. So for now, what you have to remember? For now, you have to remember like first is the access specifier, second is the return type, and third is the basically the name of the method. Got it? So have a look over here. This is the name, whatever name we want to give. And after that, there is a method body. So whatever you write inside this is belongs to the body of that method. All right. So here only one line is written, system.out.print display. So whenever you call this method outside of that class from any other class using by creating an object, so whenever you will call this, so this inside the body, whatever is written, that will get computed. Okay, let's move forward and creating an object. So you already know now how to declare a class, and inside the class how to create a data member and how to create a method we covered. Now we have to learn how to create an object. So object, like I told you here, I already gave you an example over here. If you look like what I told you, so this is the class, this is one class, and to create object, what we do, we write the class name. First, what we write? Class name. then the name of the object, then we give new keyword and the again name of the class. So let us look over here. So what we write, so point is name of the class. Suppose one class is there like class point, okay, and in that class point, suppose you want to create an object of that class point. So how you'll write? You'll write point, that is the name of the class. The name of the class is point. So first you will write the name of the class, first name of the class name, class name. Then second, what we are writing, point, that is the object name. Like how you are creating a variable, you create a variable using int a is equals to 10, suppose. Similar to this, we are creating the object also. First we are writing the data type. Here what we were writing, here we were writing the data type, then the variable name, okay, and equals to the value, okay, whatever value it will store. All right, so here similar to this, if you have a comparison, you can see first we write the class name, all right, then we write object name. This is what object name, and then we write a new keyword. I will explain you what this new keyword is, and then we write new, this is a keyword, and then again we write the class name, again we write class name, class name, and like we call it, like how we call a function, similar to that we call it in the parenthesis. So this is basically the syntax of creating like syntax for creating object. Got it? So this, if you look over here, it has three parts. First one is the declaration. Like declaration, how we declare it, like we declare variable like int a. So this is the what declaration means. Second one is instantiation. That means using new keyword, we are creating an instance. That is, we are creating an object during runtime. Okay. And third one is initialization. That means whatever pointer variable pointer address we are getting, we are storing into some variable. This is also a variable. What type of variable? It is a class type variable. That is what we call it as an object. So class type variable, we call it as an object. Okay. So next, if we see one by one, that is initialization. If you see, sorry, declaration. So how we declare? We write the class name. I already told you, first we write the class name, then we write the name of the object. So similarly, you can see in the declaration part, first we write the class name and then we write the object name. Got it? Similar to this, if you take an example, suppose one class is there and the name of the class is point. So we write point and we write point one, that is point one, point two, or anything you can write. That means it's correspond to the name of this object. So this is a separate object. Now suppose you want to create another object of the same point. So what you can write, point, that is the name of the class, then P2. Suppose you are creating P2. So this is one separate object. This is a separate object. So you have created 2 point object. All right. Similarly, there you can see like it is a rectangle. Then the class name is first is a rectangle, and this is rect1 is the object name. So you have to keep in mind like this is the syntax to declare object. Okay. Next is instantiation. So you have to keep in mind like a new keyword. I already told you like new keyword is a dynamic memory allocator. So what it is doing, whenever you are trying to create an object, so class doesn't require like the memory, like whatever variable or whatever stuff you are creating. So whenever you create an object, that much memory, suppose you have written one class point, and inside this suppose there is int x and there is int y. All right, so this int integer is of how many byte? It is of 4 byte. and this again int is of 4 byte, so it is of 4 byte and 4 byte again. All right. Now, when you declare this, this memory is not utilized. But whenever you create an object using this point p1 is equals to new point, whenever you create like this, it will allocate. Suppose it will allocate like you wrote new keyword. So suppose this is your object, this is your object, this one is your p1 object. So it will allocate the memory in the heap. So there is basically two types of memory. One is the stack memory and one is the heap memory. Basically, we use the heap memory, means computer that uses the heap memory during the runtime. So whenever your program is running, then you are calling a new keyword. That means some part of the heap memory, it is stored by, it is created for this object, and this object reference means where that object is created. Like suppose you live in XYZ, so where that address is present. Similar to this, suppose this is a country, and inside that country where that particular object is present, that address will get returned to P1. And P1 is basically storing the reference, that is the address where that object is created. This happens during the runtime. So whenever you write point P1 is equals to new point P1, so you have to keep in mind this memory, whatever memory required by this object is created in the heap, and that address is returned back to this variable. So basically the variable P1 that you have created is storing what? It is storing the reference where that object got created. Suppose here it got created. So suppose there is some reference XYZ, the memory address that gets stored into the point, into the variable P1, that is a reference. Got it? So whenever you call this, so I told you inside this point class, there is two int variable, intx and inty. That means for one int, it requires 4 byte, and for again another int, it requires 4 byte. So whenever you create this object using this syntax, whenever you create this object, 16 bytes of memory, it requires 8 bytes of memory. It will require 8 bytes of memory. So similar to this, if you again create point p2 is equals to new point new point. So this again requires 8 byte. So this will require 8 byte, and this again will require 8 byte. Now again another object will be created. Suppose here object for P2 got created. This is a object 2 you can think of, and this object reference will be returned to P2. And these all things happen during the runtime. That means when your program is running, during that time it happens, and the reference is stored into the point variable, that is the object. All right. So you have to keep in mind, new is a dynamic memory allocator which allocates the memory during the runtime. That means whenever your program is running, during that time, it will allocate some memory from the heap. From the heap, it will allocate some memory and it will return back the reference of that object. Okay. Now next, initialization. So you can do in two separate 2 points, means 2 steps. Like if you create a point p1, and then you can write p1 is equals to new point. Got it? So using this, you can